The unseen owner. John Bennett stood on the bustling sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, his dark jeans and plain black jacket blending into the sea of pedestrians. The fall air had a sharp edge, but it was nothing compared to the chill of anticipation he felt as he looked up at the grand storefront in front of him. Gold-embossed letters glinted in the afternoon light, spelling out the name of one of the most luxurious brands in the city, his brand. The sleek glass windows offered a view of the pristine interior, a world of polished marble floors, elegantly curated displays, and the hum of wealth and sophistication. To any passerby, John looked like just another man out for a casual day in the city. His baseball cap sat low on his forehead, obscuring the details of his face. No one would guess that he was the owner of this store, a key player in a multi-million-dollar luxury empire. And that was exactly the way he wanted it today. John had built his fortune from the ground up, starting with nothing but ambition and hard work. Over the years, he had expanded his brand into a worldwide name, known for elegance and exclusivity. But as his business grew, so did his distance from the day-to-day operations. He often found himself wondering if the values he had poured into the foundation of his company still held true. Were customers being treated with the respect and warmth he had envisioned? Did his employees see beyond appearances? That's why he was here today, not as John Bennett, the billionaire CEO, but as an ordinary shopper. This was something he did from time to time, visiting his stores in disguise to get a glimpse of how things really worked without the weight of his name influencing interactions. But this time felt different. This store, nestled in the heart of his hometown, held a special place in his heart. He had grown up not far from here, and the success of this location had always been a personal point of pride. Taking a deep breath, John pushed open the glass door, stepping into the cool, polished world he had created. The soft chime overhead announced his arrival, but no one paid him any mind. Inside, the store was a study in understated luxury. The scent of expensive cologne hung in the air, mixing with the quiet jazz playing softly in the background. Shoppers moved leisurely between displays of high-end fashion, jewelry, and accessories, their designer bags swinging from their arms. John wandered towards the display of watches near the center of the room, his fingers lightly grazing the glass case. He had selected most of these pieces himself, each one crafted with the utmost attention to detail. But today, he was just another customer, one who didn't fit the usual mold. Dressed in his casual clothes, he knew he wouldn't catch anyone's eye as a potential big spender. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Richard Coleman, the franchise owner, standing near the counter. Richard was everything you'd expect in a man running a luxury store, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his graying hair slicked back, and a look of polite detachment on his face as he conversed with a woman in an expensive coat. He gave her his full attention, his voice low and smooth, his smile professional. But then Richard's eyes flicked towards John. The change in his expression was subtle, but unmistakable. The polite indifference was quickly replaced by a hint of annoyance, as if John's very presence in the store was an intrusion. John pretended not to notice, continuing to inspect a sleek silver watch with a leather strap. He could feel Richard's eyes on him as he stood there, examining the timepiece. It was clear the store owner had already judged him, pegging him as someone who didn't belong. But John wanted to see how far Richard would go. Holding the watch up to the light, he turned towards the counter where Richard stood. "Excuse me," John said, keeping his tone light. "Could you tell me more about this watch?" Richard looked him over, his gaze moving slowly from John's worn sneakers to his faded jeans and jacket. The moment stretched out, the air between them thick with silent judgment. Finally, Richard stepped forward, his smile fading into something far more dismissive. "That's one of our limited edition models," Richard said, his tone clipped. "Very exclusive, but it might not be what you're looking for." John raised an eyebrow. "Oh, why's that?" Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "It's a very high-end piece," he replied, as if he were speaking to a child. "Quite expensive. Maybe you'd prefer to look at something more accessible. John's smile remained in place, but inside, he could feel the flicker of irritation grow. He had been through this before, people judging him based on his appearance, assuming things without knowing a single thing about him. But this was different. This was his store. "I like high-end pieces," John said calmly, watching Richard closely. "What makes this one special?" Richard sighed, as though the effort of explaining was beneath him. "It's crafted by one of the finest watchmakers in Switzerland. The materials are top tier, and the craftsmanship is unparalleled. It's a collector's item, really, limited to just a few pieces worldwide." John nodded thoughtfully, still holding the watch. "Sounds impressive. How much does it cost?" Richard hesitated, his eyes scanning John's face, trying to gauge if he could afford it. "It's priced at $122,000, he said finally, his voice filled with reluctance, as though the number was too high for John to comprehend. "But as I mentioned, we have other options that might be more in line with your budget." John felt the anger simmer just beneath the surface, but he kept his expression neutral. "And if I wanted to buy this one?" Richard's mouth tightened. "Well, we'd need to see proof of payment before we proceed. We don't just let anyone walk out with our best pieces." The comment hung in the air, and John stared at Richard, his patience thinning. The meaning behind Richard's words was clear. John wasn't the kind of person who should even be touching this watch, let alone buying it. It wasn't just a matter of policy, it was a matter of perception, a perception shaped by skin color and casual clothes. "I see," John said softly, placing the watch back in the display. "So it's store policy to question a customer's ability to pay before making a sale." Richard shifted uncomfortably, his defensiveness rising. "It's not about questioning," he said quickly. "It's about ensuring the integrity of our brand. We cater to a certain clientele. We have to protect our image." John held his gaze, nodding slowly. "Right. Well, thank you for your time." Without waiting for a response, John turned and walked towards the door. The chimes sounded again as he stepped back into the cool air of the city, the weight of the encounter settling heavily on his shoulders. His thoughts were racing. He had seen enough. Today, he had come in as an ordinary customer, but tomorrow, he would return as John Bennett, the owner, and things were going to change. As he walked down Fifth Avenue, blending back into the crowd, John felt his anger transform into something sharper: determination. This wasn't just about one bad employee or one bad experience. It was about ensuring that the values his company stood for were upheld, and that no one was made to feel lesser because of how they looked. Tomorrow, he would make sure Richard Coleman learned that lesson the hard way: the return of the real owner. The following morning, John woke up earlier than usual, his mind already buzzing with the plan he had mapped out overnight. He stood by his bedroom window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline, sipping his coffee as he mentally prepared for what was to come. The incident from the previous day replayed in his mind, but this time with a sense of clarity. It wasn't just about correcting Richard's attitude. It was about reaffirming what his company stood for. John had always believed that luxury wasn't just about the price tag. It was about an experience, a feeling. It was about making every customer, no matter who they were or how much they spent, feel valued and appreciated. And if his employees weren't carrying that torch, something had gone terribly wrong. His assistant, Lauren, had already scheduled a meeting with the store staff for later that day. None of them knew that John Bennett, the CEO, was coming. They only knew that the founder of the company would be paying a visit. As he finished his coffee, John couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and disappointment. Anticipation, because he was about to make some necessary changes. Disappointment, because he had to. By the time John arrived at the store, the day was well underway. He had chosen to ditch the casual attire from the previous day, opting instead for a tailored navy suit that exuded the quiet confidence of a man who had earned his place at the top. His presence, even without his name being announced, carried weight. Heads turned as he stepped out of his black SUV and crossed the sidewalk to the store's entrance. The staff hadn't seen him in person in years, but his face was unmistakable. He was, after all, the face behind the brand. As soon as he walked in, the soft chime echoed throughout the store, drawing the attention of every employee present. Richard Coleman, standing by the counter as usual, froze for a moment before a look of recognition dawned on his face. His expression quickly shifted from one of casual indifference to a forced smile of pleasant surprise. "Mr. Bennett," Richard greeted, stepping forward, his hand extended. "What an unexpected pleasure. We weren't informed of your visit today." John took his hand in a firm grip, his smile polite but distant. "I wanted to see things firsthand," he replied smoothly, glancing around the store. "Thought I'd come in unannounced." The color drained slightly from Richard's face, but he quickly recovered, plastering on his practiced smile. Of course. Please, feel free to look around. If there's anything you need, we're at your service." John's eyes settled on Richard, but he didn't linger. Instead, he walked further into the store, his gaze moving over the pristine displays, the glistening jewelry cases, and the designer handbags resting elegantly on their stands. Everything was perfect, just as he had designed it. The air hummed with luxury, but beneath that surface, he could feel the crack in the foundation. The tension was palpable among the staff as they whispered to each other, eyes darting towards him every few seconds. As John approached the watch display, where he had been so easily dismissed the day before, he spotted Sarah, one of the younger sales associates, standing nearby. She was busy attending to an elderly couple who were admiring a bracelet. John watched her for a moment, observing her professionalism, her attentiveness, the genuine warmth in her smile. She was doing her job exactly the way he had hoped every employee would. He nodded to himself. Not everyone needed a wake-up call, but some clearly did. After a few minutes, John turned back towards the center of the store, where Richard had been hovering nervously, watching his every move. It was time. "Richard, could you gather the staff in the meeting room?" John asked, his voice steady, but with an unmistakable edge of authority. "I think we need to have a conversation." Richard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly masked it with an eager nod. "Of course, Mr. Bennett. Right away." As Richard hurried off to inform the team, John took a moment to steady himself. He wasn't one for public dressing downs, but this was necessary. It wasn't just about Richard. It was about setting an example for everyone in the room. The values that had built this brand weren't up for negotiation, and today he was going to make sure they were enforced with crystal clarity. When John entered the sleek, glass-walled meeting room a few minutes later, the entire store staff was already gathered. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and a touch of fear. Richard stood at the front of the room, his polished demeanor showing cracks, while the rest of the team sat in rows of chairs, eyes wide and unsure. John took his place at the head of the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. He waited for the door to close behind him before he began. "Thank you all for being here on such short notice," he started, his voice calm but firm. "I know it's not every day the CEO walks into one of his own stores unannounced, but that's exactly the point. I should be able to walk into any of my stores, at any time, and see the same values being upheld, the same standards of excellence that this company was built on. Unfortunately, that's not what I experienced yesterday." A few whispers rippled through the room, but they quickly died down as John's gaze swept across the room. "I came in yesterday, just like any other customer," he continued, his eyes locking onto Richard, who shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't wearing an expensive suit, and I didn't announce who I was. I simply wanted to see how I would be treated as an ordinary shopper. What I encountered was disappointing, to say the least." Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of pale by now, and the rest of the staff looked on in shocked silence. "I was judged based on my appearance," John said, his voice rising slightly. "Dismissed because I didn't look like someone who belonged. That's not how we treat people in this company. That's not what this brand represents. Luxury isn't just about price. It's about experience. And everyone who walks through those doors deserves the best we have to offer, whether they're here to buy a $10,000 bracelet or just browse. He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was so silent that the sound of the city outside seemed distant and muted. "Richard," John said, turning to face the store owner directly, "you've been with this company for a long time. You know better. What happened yesterday was unacceptable, and it reflects poorly on you as a leader. I expect more from you, and so do the people who walk into this store." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had been caught in a storm, trying to stay upright, but failing miserably. John didn't wait for an apology. Instead, he addressed the rest of the team. "This is a wake-up call for all of us," he said. "Our customers are the reason we're here. Without them, this brand doesn't exist. I want each of you to remember that the next time someone walks through those doors, treat them with respect, with dignity, and with the understanding that they chose us. We didn't choose them." With that, John took a deep breath and straightened his jacket. "I'm going to be checking in more often," he added, his tone final, but not without a trace of warmth. "And when I do, I expect to see the values of this company reflected in every interaction, with every customer. Because that's what makes us great. Not just the products we sell, but how we make people feel." As John finished, there was a palpable shift in the room. The staff sat straighter, nodding slowly as they absorbed his words. Richard looked like he had been knocked down several pegs, but even he couldn't deny the truth in John's speech. "Now," John said, "let's get back to work." The meeting ended with a quiet, focused energy, and as the employees filed out, John stayed behind, watching the city through the glass walls. The confrontation had been necessary, but more importantly, it had been a reminder. He hadn't just built a company, he had built a vision. And now, more than ever, he was determined to protect it. The shift in the air. The days following John Bennett's visit saw a noticeable shift in the atmosphere of the store. It was subtle at first, a quiet ripple of change that slowly gathered momentum as each employee began to internalize the weight of his words. They weren't just working for a brand. They were part of something bigger, something that demanded a level of excellence beyond mere sales numbers. Richard Coleman, on the other hand, had taken the blow harder than most. The man who had once strutted through the store with an air of untouchable confidence now seemed far more subdued. He had retreated into himself, his usual bravado replaced by a silent contemplation. For the first time in years, Richard found himself questioning his approach to leadership. And though the sting of John's public reprimand still lingered, there was a growing recognition in his heart that the CEO's words had been necessary. As Richard stood by the window of his office, staring out at the bustling New York streets below, he thought back to his early days with the company. He had joined Bennett Luxury Goods during its infancy, back when John himself was still a relatively unknown name in the fashion world. Back then, Richard had admired John's vision, his unwavering belief that luxury wasn't just about exclusivity, but about creating a space where everyone felt like they belonged, where every detail mattered. Over time, however, Richard had become fixated on the bottom line. He had lost sight of the human element, of the very values that had made the company so successful in the first place. He sighed heavily, pushing away from the window and sinking into his leather chair. The soft hum of the city seemed to mock him. He needed to make things right, not just with John, but with the entire team. And more importantly, he needed to rediscover what had drawn him to this company in the first place. Meanwhile, on the store floor, the staff had begun to feel the difference in their day-to-day operations. Sarah, the young sales associate who had caught John's attention during his visit, had always been a diligent worker, but now she felt a new sense of purpose. John's speech had resonated deeply with her. It wasn't just about selling luxury items to the wealthy. It was about making people feel seen, heard, and valued. It was about embodying the ethos of the brand, treating every customer like they were the most important person in the room. She wasn't alone in this realization. The entire team had started to adjust their approach. There was a noticeable increase in attentiveness as they interacted with customers, and eagerness to go above and beyond in their service. It wasn't forced, it was genuine. Even the older staff members, those who had been with the company for years and had grown comfortable in their routines, found themselves making an extra effort. John's visit had been a wake-up call, and none of them wanted to be the reason the company fell short of its own standards again. One afternoon, a middle-aged woman entered the store, her appearance unassuming. Dressed in a simple beige coat and modest shoes, she might have been easily overlooked on any other day. But Sarah, having learned from John's lesson, greeted her with the same warmth and attentiveness she would have shown to a high-profile client. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Sarah said, offering a kind smile. "Is there anything I can help you find today?" The woman seemed hesitant at first, glancing around the store nervously. "I was just looking. I'm not sure if this is really the right place for me." Sarah tilted her head, her smile never wavering. "Of course it is. Everyone is welcome here. Whether you're looking for something specific or just browsing, I'm happy to assist you in any way." The woman seemed to relax slightly, and after a moment's hesitation, she stepped forward. "I'm actually looking for a gift. For my daughter. She's graduating from college next month, and I wanted to get her something special. Something she can keep for a long time." Sarah's heart warmed at the woman's sincerity. She could see the emotion behind the purchase, the love of a mother wanting to give her daughter something meaningful to mark a significant milestone. This wasn't just a transaction. It was a moment. "I think we can definitely help with that," Sarah said, her voice soft and genuine. "Let me show you a few pieces that I think would be perfect." As they moved through the store, Sarah carefully selected items that matched the woman's description. Classic, timeless pieces that carried a sense of elegance without being over the top. She took the time to explain the craftsmanship behind each piece, the history of the materials, and the story behind the designs. She wasn't rushing the process, wasn't pushing for a sale. She was simply guiding the woman through an experience, making sure she felt comfortable and confident in her choice. After nearly an hour, the woman settled on a delicate gold bracelet, its intricate design both understated and beautiful. As Sarah wrapped the purchase, the woman's eyes shimmered with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't expect to be treated so kindly here. You've made this a really special experience for me." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. "It's my pleasure," she replied. "Your daughter is lucky to have a mother who cares so much. I'm sure she'll love the bracelet." As the woman left the store, Sarah stood for a moment, watching her walk away with a sense of fulfillment. This was why she loved her job, not for the sales, but for the connection she could create with people, for the way she could make them feel valued and appreciated. It was a far cry from the transactional nature of luxury retail that Richard had once promoted. Later that evening, as the store quieted down and the staff began to wrap up for the day, Richard emerged from his office. He had spent the better part of the afternoon reflecting on John's visit and what needed to change. He watched from a distance as Sarah and the other associates meticulously arranged the displays, ensuring that everything was perfect for the next day. For the first time in years, Richard felt something stir within him, an understanding that he had been missing for a long time. He realized that being the manager of this store wasn't just about maintaining profits or keeping up appearances. It was about leading by example, about embodying the values that John had so clearly outlined. The store wasn't just a business. It was a reflection of the brand's heart, and Richard had neglected that truth for far too long. He walked over to where Sarah was finishing up with a display of handbags. She looked up, surprised to see him out on the floor so late in the day. "Sarah," Richard began, his voice softer than usual, "I've been meaning to thank you." She blinked, confused. "For what?" "For showing me what this store is really about," he replied. "You've been doing things the right way. John saw it, and now I do too." I've lost sight of what makes this place special, but watching you interact with the customers, it reminded me of why I joined this company in the first place." Sarah blushed slightly, not expecting such praise from Richard. "I'm just trying to do my job," she said modestly. "You're doing more than that," Richard said, shaking his head. "You're setting the standard, and I'm going to make sure that everyone else follows your lead." For the first time in a long while, Richard felt a weight lift off his shoulders. There was still work to be done, but now he had a clear sense of direction. The store was more than just a place where luxury items were sold. It was a place where every interaction mattered. And from now on, Richard was determined to ensure that those interactions reflected the values that had built the Bennett brand. As he headed back to his office, Richard couldn't help but smile to himself. Change was in the air, and it felt long overdue. A clash of minds and cultures. Days passed since the first meeting between the humans and the Gilari, and tensions between both sides were rising. Every interaction between them was a delicate dance, fraught with the risk of misunderstanding or aggression. The Gilari, creatures deeply rooted in their logical, almost rigid mindset, were continually bewildered by human behavior. To them, emotions were an inefficiency, something to be regulated and minimized for the sake of clear, objective thinking. Humans, on the other hand, thrived on emotion, intuition, and a deep sense of curiosity that the Gilari found alien. Captain Darrow had spent many sleepless nights preparing for the next round of negotiations with the Gilari leadership. The first encounter had shown promise, but also highlighted just how different their cultures were. The Gilari didn't understand metaphor or humor, nor could they grasp the concept of human creativity. For them, everything had to be neatly categorized and explained. Darrow knew that if the humans were to gain an ally, or at the very least, avoid a powerful enemy, they needed to find common ground. In the heart of the Gilari capital ship, an imposing structure of sharp angles and cold metallic hues, Darrow and his team sat at a sleek table made from some strange, shimmering material. The air was dense with the tension of competing ideologies. Opposite them sat the Gilari leaders, including General Corden, the towering figure who had initially dismissed the humans. His narrow eyes betrayed a simmering impatience, his body language stiffer than before. "Your methods of warfare are unpredictable," Corden began, his voice sharp. "The way your kind improvises is chaotic. We cannot comprehend how you manage to win battles when your tactics seem so unrefined." Darrow exchanged a glance with Dr. Elena Chen, the team's cultural and psychological expert. She had been studying the Gilari psychological profiles and body language for weeks, trying to unlock what made them tick. "We improvise because we trust our instincts," Darrow said carefully. "We adapt because no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Every battle is a living thing, and we treat it as such." Corden tilted his head, a subtle sign that he found the concept perplexing. "A battle is a living thing." Darrow suppressed a smile. "In a manner of speaking, we don't always rely on formulas or predetermined outcomes. We allow for variables, for changes we cannot predict." The Gilari shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the ambiguity of the discussion. They were a species used to strict hierarchies and meticulous strategies, where every outcome could be calculated based on data and precedent. The human approach, with its reliance on flexibility and emotional intelligence, was foreign to them. General Corden leaned forward, his gaze hard. "We view your species as dangerous, uncontrolled. If we are to cooperate, we must know that you will not bring instability into our systems." Elena stepped in, her voice calm but firm. "We understand that our methods seem chaotic to you, but you must realize that this adaptability is what has allowed us to survive. We are not bound by predictability because the universe itself is unpredictable. And in that chaos, we find opportunity." The room fell silent. The Gilari, while intelligent and advanced, struggled with the philosophical depth of what the humans were presenting. Their culture had always sought to control and contain, But here was a species that thrived on the very thing they feared. Corden remained quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that demanded attention. Your way of thinking is reckless, but perhaps it has merit in circumstances we have not faced. Darrow nodded, sensing an opening. We don't seek to change your ways, General. We only ask that you see value in ours. The universe is vast, and not all problems can be solved through rigid structures. Together, we could combine our strengths. Corden's eyes flickered as if calculating the proposition. You speak of cooperation, yet your kind is prone to unpredictable behavior. How can we trust that your instincts will not lead to betrayal? It was Elena's turn to answer, her words carefully chosen. Trust is built over time, but the fact that we are here, sitting at this table despite our differences, is a step toward that trust. We recognize that our unpredictability is seen as a flaw, but it is also a strength. It allows us to approach problems in ways others cannot. That adaptability has allowed us to survive against greater threats than ourselves. Corden glanced at his fellow Gilari, a brief but telling moment of consultation. When he turned back to Darrow, his expression was unreadable. We have fought many enemies in our time. Some relied on brute force, others on deception, but none have presented the kind of flexibility that you describe. It is both troubling and intriguing. There was a pause as Corden continued to deliberate. For a species as analytical as the Gilari, decisions were rarely made on instinct, but perhaps that was exactly what they needed to learn from the humans. Suddenly, Corden stood, towering over the humans with an air of finality. We will observe your methods further before making any commitments. If your adaptability proves to be as valuable as you claim, then perhaps we can find common ground. But know this, Captain Darrow, any deviation toward chaos that threatens our order will not be tolerated. The humans knew this was the best outcome they could have hoped for at this stage. As the Gilari delegation left the room, Darrow allowed himself a deep breath. They had not yet secured an alliance, but they had planted the seeds of understanding. It would take time, patience, and perhaps more than a little human improvisation to nurture that seed. Elena leaned over to Darrow, whispering with a small smile, I think they're starting to get it. Darrow chuckled softly, or at least they're trying. That's something. But as they left the sterile Gilari ship and returned to their own vessel, Darrow couldn't shake the feeling that this uneasy partnership was balancing on a razor's edge. One misstep, one misunderstanding, and it could all collapse into conflict. He glanced at Elena, whose brow was furrowed in thought. We need to show them what we can do, she murmured, almost to herself. Darrow nodded. Agreed. But we'll have to do it carefully. One wrong move, and we'll confirm every fear they have about us. As the human ship pulled away from the Gilari fleet, its engines glowing faintly against the dark backdrop of space, Darrow stared out into the void. There was so much at stake. The survival of his species might depend on the next steps they took, and in the vast uncertainty of the galaxy, there was only one thing he could rely on: the unpredictable, unstoppable force of human will. The journey ahead was fraught with danger, but Darrow knew one thing for certain. Humans had always thrived in the unknown, and this time would be no different. Unseen forces and unlikely allies. The Gilari had agreed to observe, but observation alone would not be enough. Captain Darrow knew that to gain their trust, the humans had to demonstrate their greatest asset: adaptability, under the harshest conditions. But what troubled him more than the tentative alliance was the sense that something else lurked in the shadows, an unseen force watching their every move. Back aboard the Odyssey, Darrow met with his key officers. They gathered in the dimly lit strategy room, surrounded by holographic displays of Gilari ships and potential battle scenarios. Dr. Elena Chin, always thoughtful and sharp, sat to his right, while Commander Ruiz, the no-nonsense tactical officer, took his place at the far end of the table. The rest of the senior staff filled the seats between them, each one wearing the same expression of restrained anxiety. The Gilari have given us a window, Darrow began, his voice firm. They'll be watching closely, and we can't afford any mistakes. Ruiz leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the display. Captain, you realize they'll likely test us, right? It's not enough that we just show our capabilities. They'll push us, see how far we can bend without breaking. Darrow nodded. I expect nothing less. Elena interjected, her voice softer but no less commanding. The Gilari will be looking for weaknesses, inconsistencies. They thrive on precision and control, so any deviation from that will confirm their doubts about us. But we can use that to our advantage. Ruiz raised an eyebrow. How so? By showing them that flexibility isn't a weakness, we can demonstrate that in a universe full of chaos, those who adapt thrive. We've faced threats before that didn't follow rules or logic, and we overcame them by thinking outside the box. Ruiz crossed his arms, skepticism evident. And how do you propose we do that? Before Elena could answer, the door to the strategy room slid open, and Lieutenant Wren, the chief intelligence officer, hurried in. Her usually calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a look of concern. Captain, she said, slightly out of breath, we've intercepted some strange transmissions on the outer edges of Gilari space. They're not from the Gilari, and they're not encrypted in any way we've seen before. Darrow's gaze sharpened. Unknown. What kind of transmissions? Wren brought up a series of distorted audio files and waveforms on the display, lines of static punctuated by odd pulses and warbling tones. We don't know, sir. It could be a new species or something else. But whatever it is, it's broadcasting at irregular intervals, as if trying to remain hidden. The room fell silent as the implications settled over the crew. An unknown force, lingering on the edges of their mission, could complicate an already fragile situation. Darrow's mind raced. Could this be why the Gilari were so hesitant to trust them? Was there another player at the table, someone both sides were unaware of? Do the Gilari know about this? Darrow asked, turning to Wren. She hesitated. We can't be sure. It's possible they've picked up the transmissions too, but they haven't mentioned anything. Ruiz leaned forward again, this time more serious. Captain, if there's an unknown threat out there, we need to be ready. If the Gilari find out before we do, it could put us in a compromised position. Darrow rubbed his chin, deep in thought. Wren, keep monitoring the transmissions. If there's a pattern, I want to know about it. Turning to Ruiz, he added, prepare the ship for a potential engagement. We don't know what we're dealing with, but I want us ready for anything. As the meeting concluded, Darrow remained seated, his thoughts swirling. He could feel the pressure building. Between the delicate negotiations with the Gilari, the looming threat of the unknown signals, and the burden of proving humanity's worth, the weight of responsibility was immense. Yet there was something else, something deeper nagging at him. After the room emptied, Elena lingered. She approached Darrow cautiously, as if sensing the storm brewing in his mind. What do you think it is? She asked, referring to the unknown transmissions. Darrow shook his head. I don't know, but it feels deliberate, like someone or something is trying to stay just out of sight. Elena sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. You're worried about the Gilari, aren't you? He sighed. Of course I am. They're a powerful species, and right now, we're walking on eggshells. If they think we're hiding something from them, or if they feel threatened by this unknown force, we could lose any chance of a partnership. Elena nodded thoughtfully. But you also see this as an opportunity, don't you? Darrow smiled faintly. You know me too well, Doctor. If we can figure out what's behind those transmissions, Elena continued, and if it turns out to be a threat to both us and the Gilari, we might be able to present ourselves as more than just unpredictable allies. We could become indispensable. That's the gamble, Darrow agreed. But we can't make the wrong move. The Gilari don't trust us yet. If we act too soon, they'll see us as reckless. Too late, and we'll look weak. Elena's eyes flickered with understanding. We need to find a balance. Show them we can adapt without losing control. Darrow stood and paced to the viewport, staring out at the stars. Somewhere, beyond the vast expanse of space, something, or someone, was watching them. He could feel it. But what troubled him most was the thought that the Gilari might already know about this and were simply testing humanity's reaction. "What do you suggest?" Darrow asked, turning back to Alina. "We take a calculated risk," she said confidently. "We investigate the signals, but in a way that keeps the Gilari in the loop. Just enough to show we're aware and proactive, but not so much that we appear overly aggressive." Darrow nodded slowly, his mind already formulating a plan. "I'll speak with Corden. If we're going to make this work, we need to keep communication open. The last thing we need is a misunderstanding." The days that followed were tense. The Odyssey's crew worked tirelessly, analyzing the mysterious transmissions and preparing for the possibility of an unknown encounter. Darrow kept the Gilari informed, carefully balancing transparency with caution. Corden, for his part, remained stoic but curious, his suspicions about humanity still simmering beneath the surface. Then, one fateful day, the Odyssey intercepted a new transmission, stronger and clearer than before. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was a distress call, and it was not coming from any known species. "Captain," Wren called from her station, her voice urgent. "We've traced the signal. It's coming from the far edge of the Gilari-controlled sector." Darrow's heart raced. "Put it on the main display." The audio crackled to life, filled with static but unmistakably desperate. A voice, distorted and alien, called out for help, speaking in a language that the ship's translators struggled to decipher. But the message was clear. Whoever they were in trouble, and they were close. Ruse stepped forward. "Captain, we're the closest ship to the source. We can be there within hours." Darrow turned to Alina, his expression grim. "This could be it. If we help them, we might prove our worth. But if it's a trap..." Alina met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "We've never shied away from risk before." Darrow took a deep breath. "Set a course for the signal. Let's find out who, or what, is out there." As the Odyssey powered up its engines and shot through the stars, Darrow couldn't help but feel that this was the moment that would define humanity's fate. The unknown was calling, and once again, humans would answer. Into the abyss. The engines of the Odyssey hummed steadily as the ship moved through the vast, starry expanse of space, homing in on the mysterious distress signal. Captain Darrow stood at the bridge, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead, a mixture of anticipation and caution gnawing at him. The source of the signal was still hours away, but the tension was already palpable. The crew moved with quiet precision, fully aware that the situation could turn from discovery to disaster at any moment. Corden, the Gilari envoy, had been informed of the ship's new course, and his reaction had been characteristically reserved. The Gilari, with their penchant for control and predictability, wouldn't have taken kindly to the abrupt change in plans, but Darrow had positioned it as a chance for mutual benefit. If this unknown species, whoever they were, posed a threat, it was in everyone's best interest to know. Corden agreed, but Darrow sensed the undercurrent of doubt in his cold eyes. "Captain," Lieutenant Wren called from her station, breaking the silence. "We've pinpointed the location of the signal. It's coming from a small system near the outskirts of Gilari space. There's one planet, barely habitable by our standards, but it's the only source of the transmission." Darrow stepped forward, examining the holographic projection of the system. The planet was barren, its atmosphere thin and unwelcoming, orbiting a dim, dying star. It didn't seem like the kind of place any intelligent species would choose to settle. Yet the distress signal persisted, a cry for help from the void. "Any signs of life?" Darrow asked, scanning the projection. "Minimal, sir," Wren replied. "But there's interference. Something's distorting our readings, and we can't get a clear picture of what's down there." Commander Ruiz, standing beside the captain, crossed his arms and frowned. Sounds like a trap to me. We go in blind, and we're sitting ducks. Darrow nodded, fully aware of the risks. Agreed. But we can't ignore it either. If it's a legitimate distress call, we have a responsibility. And if it's something more, we need to know what we're dealing with. Ruiz glanced at Darrow, his expression hardening. Then we go in prepared for the worst. The captain's hand hovered over the ship-wide comms panel for a moment before pressing the button. His voice echoed throughout the corridors of the Odyssey. Attention all hands. This is Captain Darrow. We are approaching an unknown situation. Be prepared for possible hostile encounters. This is not a drill. All stations to full alert. The ship's atmosphere shifted instantly. The calm hum of routine replaced by the focused intensity of battle readiness. The crew snapped into action, running final checks on weapon systems, shields, and boarding protocols. In the armory, soldiers geared up, sliding into advanced combat suits designed to handle any environment, any threat. The quiet murmurs of fear and excitement spread as word of the mysterious signal filtered through the ranks. In the medical bay, Dr. Elena Chen prepared as well. Her staff worked swiftly, organizing supplies and trade stations, readying themselves for any casualties that might come. She moved among them, her calm demeanor helping to soothe the anxious crew. But inside, she felt the same uncertainty gnawing at her. Whatever was waiting for them out there, it was not going to be simple. As the hours ticked by, Darrow returned to the bridge, his eyes never leaving the projection of the barren planet. He had seen countless battlefields in his time, planets ravaged by war, but this place felt different. There was something eerie about the silence, the way the signal continued to pulse despite no signs of life. It felt like a void, drawing them in. "Sir," Wren called again, her voice tense. "We're approaching the planet's atmosphere. I'm picking up something." Wait. Multiple signals now scattered across the surface, but still no clear readings. It's like something's jamming us. "Shields up," Darrow ordered, his voice steady. "Prepare for landing. I want a tactical team ready for immediate deployment." Ruiz barked orders to the security officers, and within moments, a team of 12 heavily armed soldiers stood ready in the hangar bay, waiting for the order to move. Among them were the best the Odyssey had to offer, hardened veterans of countless battles, handpicked for this mission. Darrow knew that whatever lay ahead, these were the people he trusted to face it head-on. The Odyssey descended through the planet's atmosphere, shaking slightly as it passed through turbulence caused by the thin, unstable air. Below, the surface was bleak. Rocky plains stretched out as far as the eye could see, broken only by jagged cliffs and the occasional dried riverbed. It was a wasteland, devoid of life. Yet the distress signal continued to blare, now clearer than ever. "We're receiving the signal directly now, sir," Wren said, her hands dancing over the console. "It's coming from a structure, about 50 kilometers to the north." "A structure?" Darrow repeated, leaning forward. "What kind of structure?" "Unknown, but it's old. Very old. It's partially buried under the surface. Looks like some sort of installation, human in design." The bridge fell silent as everyone processed the implications. A human installation, on the far edge of Gilleri space, sending a distress signal after who knows how long. How had it ended up there? And why was it calling for help now? "Prepare the shuttle," Darrow said, breaking the silence. "I'm going down with the team." Ruiz immediately protested. "Captain, you should stay on the ship. We don't know what's down there." Darrow turned to him, his expression resolute. "I'm not sending my crew into a situation like this without being there myself. I need to see it with my own eyes." Ruiz reluctantly nodded, knowing there was no arguing with Darrow once his mind was made up. The captain had always led from the front, and this time would be no different. Within minutes, Darrow and his team were aboard the shuttle, descending toward the surface of the desolate planet. The craft shuddered as it broke through the atmosphere, and soon they were hovering above the barren plains. The distant structure loomed in the horizon, half buried in rock and dust, its rusted metal exterior barely visible through the haze. The shuttle landed with a soft thud, and the ramp lowered, allowing Darrow and his team to step out onto the hard, cracked ground. The air was thin, barely breathable, and the sky above was a sickly orange, the dim light of the dying star casting long shadows across the landscape. The wind howled around them, carrying with it the faint, metallic scent of decay. Darrow scanned the horizon, his senses on high alert. The structure in the distance beckoned, a relic of some forgotten time, its purpose unknown. But there was something else, something just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. He could feel it, like the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on them. "Stay sharp," he ordered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "We don't know what we're walking into." The team moved forward, weapons at the ready, their footsteps crunching on the rocky ground. As they approached the structure, its details became clearer. A large, fortified building, its walls pockmarked with centuries of erosion. It was unmistakably human in design, but it had been abandoned for a long time. Suddenly, a soft beep echoed through Darrow's helmet. The distress signal had changed. Now it was no longer a single, continuous tone. It was broken, intermittent, as if someone, or something, was deliberately trying to mask it. "Captain," one of the soldiers called from ahead. "We've got movement." Darrow rushed forward, peering through the dust. At first, he saw nothing. Then, emerging from the shadows of the structure, came a figure. Tall, humanoid, but not human. Its skin was a mottled gray, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. It was unlike any alien species Darrow had encountered before. The figure raised its hand, and the team tensed, ready for a fight. But instead of attacking, the creature spoke, a single, haunting word that sent a chill down Darrow's spine. "Help." The captain's mind raced. Was this the source of the distress signal, or something else? Whatever it was, the mystery had deepened, and the truth lay within that ancient, crumbling structure. Darrow raised his hand to signal the team to hold. "We're going in. Stay close. Stay alert." As they moved toward the entrance, Darrow couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by the strange alien before them, but by something far older and far more dangerous. The abyss awaited, and humanity was about to confront it head-on. Echoes of the past. The doors to the ancient structure creaked open, the sound grating through the thin atmosphere like nails on metal. Dust billowed out in waves, revealing an entrance large enough for several men to walk through shoulder to shoulder. Captain Darrow motioned for the team to hold as he stepped forward, his hand resting cautiously on the grip of his weapon. The strange alien figure, with its hollow, glowing eyes, lingered at the edge of the shadows, watching their every move, but made no further attempt to communicate. The interior was just as bleak as the planet itself, dark, decayed, and cold. The corridor before them was long, lined with walls of rusted steel that bore the unmistakable marks of human craftsmanship. Scattered pieces of debris and broken equipment littered the floor, remnants of a time long forgotten. Yet the air inside felt thick, as if it were charged with something far older than the structure itself. "Activate lights," Darrow ordered, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. The soldiers clicked on their suit-mounted lights, beams cutting through the oppressive darkness. The corridor stretched further into the unknown, curving out of sight as if beckoning them to venture deeper into the heart of the complex. But something wasn't right. There was no power, no hum of generators, no flicker of emergency lights. And yet, the distress signal continued, pulsing through the dead air like a heartbeat. "How is the signal still running?" Lieutenant Wren asked, her voice filled with concern as she tapped her portable scanner. "There's no power to sustain it. And this place, it's centuries old. The technology here shouldn't be functioning at all." "That's what worries me," Darrow responded, glancing around as the shadows seemed to shift. "This place should be a tomb, but something's keeping it alive. And we're about to find out what." The alien had followed them inside, still lingering just out of reach, watching with a strange, silent intensity. It had not spoken again since uttering that single eerie word, help. It seemed reluctant, almost as if it feared the very place it had led them to. Keep your eyes on it, Darrow said quietly to one of the soldiers as he motioned for the team to press forward. But don't provoke it, not until we know what it wants. They moved deeper into the structure, their footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. The walls began to change, no longer simple steel, but a strange amalgamation of human and alien architecture. Symbols, unfamiliar and twisted, had been etched into the walls, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. Darrow paused, examining the glyphs with a frown. These markings, he began, they're not human. They don't match anything in our records. Captain, Ruse said, his voice low and cautious, I think we're dealing with something way beyond us here. This isn't just some abandoned base. It feels ancient. Darrow nodded. He had the same feeling. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt like the walls themselves were alive, watching them, waiting for something. But what? The team reached a massive chamber, the ceiling arching high above them, vanishing into the darkness. In the center stood a large, ominous machine, partially buried under debris and tangled wires. It was unlike any technology Darrow had ever seen. Its surface was smooth, almost organic, and yet it pulsed with a faint glow that seemed to draw them in. This is it, Wren whispered, stepping forward cautiously. This is the source of the signal. The machine hummed softly, as if it were breathing. Strange patterns pulsed along its surface, shifting and changing like a living organism. It looked like a fusion of human and alien technology, something that should not exist in this corner of the galaxy. But the deeper Darrow examined it, the more familiar it seemed. Captain, Wren said suddenly, her voice shaking. I'm getting human life signs. Darrow whipped around to face her. Human. From where? From inside the machine, Wren replied, her voice tinged with disbelief. But that's impossible. The readings are faint, but there's definitely something human inside. Before anyone could react, the alien figure moved. It stepped forward, approaching the machine, its glowing eyes fixed on the strange device. For the first time, it spoke again, this time in a voice filled with both sadness and urgency. Trapped. They are trapped. Darrow's heart raced. Who's trapped? What is this thing? The alien didn't respond immediately, its long fingers brushing the surface of the machine, as if it held some deep personal significance. When it finally spoke, its words sent a chill down Darrow's spine. Humans, and my people. We built this together, long ago. But we were betrayed. This is our prison. The realization hit Darrow like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just an abandoned outpost. It was a relic of a forgotten alliance, an experiment gone horribly wrong. The machine wasn't just a device. It was a containment field, holding something, or someone, within its depths. Captain, Ruse said, his voice tense. We need to get out of here. Now. But Darrow couldn't move. His eyes were locked on the machine, and a single terrible thought crossed his mind. What if they were never meant to find this? What if the distress signal had been a lure? A call not for help, but for release. Suddenly, the machine pulsed brighter, and the air around them grew heavy with energy. The alien stepped back, its glowing eyes wide with fear. They awaken, it whispered, almost to itself. Darrow's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to his team. Fall back. We're leaving. Now. But it was too late. The machine roared to life, and a wave of energy shot out, knocking them to the ground. The lights in their suits flickered, and alarms blared as systems overloaded. Darrow struggled to his feet, his vision swimming as he tried to make sense of what was happening. From the heart of the machine, figures began to emerge, shadows at first, then solid forms. They were human, but not entirely. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and their eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the alien. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if awakening from a long slumber. "Captain," Ren shouted, pulling Darrow to his feet. "We have to move." Darrow staggered, his mind racing. The figures, whatever they were moving toward them, and there were more of them now. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all emerging from the depths of the machine. "Fall back," Darrow ordered, his voice hoarse. "Get to the shuttle." The team scrambled, retreating down the corridor as the strange beings followed, their movements slow but relentless. Darrow glanced back, his heart pounding. The machine was still humming, its power growing stronger with each passing moment. "What are they?" Ruse yelled, his voice filled with panic. "I don't know," Darrow shouted back, "but we're not sticking around to find out." They reached the entrance, the cold wind of the barren planet hitting them like a slap in the face. The shuttle was waiting, engines running, ready for a quick escape. But as they rushed toward it, the alien stepped in front of Darrow, blocking his path. "You cannot leave," it said, its voice firm. "You have awakened them. Now you must finish what was started." Darrow glared at the creature, his hand tightening around his weapon. "Get out of my way." The alien's eyes flickered with sorrow. "If you leave now, they will follow. They will consume everything in their path. Your people, my people, no one will be safe." Darrow hesitated, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. If the alien was telling the truth, leaving now would doom countless lives. But staying meant facing a threat they didn't understand, one that might be unstoppable. He glanced back at his team, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. They were ready to follow him, whatever he decided. But this was a choice that weighed heavily on his soul. "Captain," Ruse said quietly, "what's the call?" Darrow took a deep breath, his eyes locking with the alien's. "We fight." The alien nodded slowly, stepping aside. "Then may your strength be enough, for all our sakes." As Darrow and his team turned to face the rising threat, the sky above them darkened. The shadows from the machine began to spread, and the figures from within moved closer. They were coming, and humanity's final stand was about to begin.